This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss, co-host of PBS's Motor Week. He'll take your calls and comments now at 844-885-4677 or email him at radio@goss-garage.com. And now, Pat Goss.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Goss's Garage. I'm Pat Goss, and in just a moment, we're going to be joined by Mr. John Davis from Motor Week. But first, we have a tip for you, something that you really should pay attention to. You see, the other day, I was talking to one of my employees, and somehow the subject of using seat belts came up. He said he never wears a seat belt because it makes him feel trapped. And I'm thinking to myself, is he serious? I thought about that. You see, I'm at the other extreme because I won't move a car out of the driveway without being buckled up. But how did we come to such differing ideas about wearing seat belts? And is there data to prove one idea or the other? I began by asking people about their seatbelt habits and found that there is a very small, highly opinionated and stubborn percentage of drivers who believe the ignorant myth that it's better to be thrown out of a vehicle in a crash than be belted in place. Next, I did research on accident ejection statistics, and there's one safest rule: wear your seatbelt. Belts help keep you in the seat so you're not thrown around in a crash. Now let's begin with rollover crashes. About half of all rollover deaths occur when people are partly or completely ejected from the vehicle. The idea that it's good to be thrown clear is actually potentially deadly. No matter the type of crash, nearly 3/4 of all people ejected, or as you like to say it, thrown clear during a crash, are killed. The statistics are undeniable and show that your risk of dying in a crash is over 3 times greater if you're ejected than not ejected. So thrown clear is a significant and deadly safety problem. Also, statistics show that most of you who don't wear seat belts tend to drive faster. Big surprise there. And therefore tend to be involved in more severe accidents. Plus, ejection is 15 times more likely for unbelted occupants. Now, back to the deadly myth that it's better to be thrown clear. Like I said, it's totally false for many reasons, but most notably due to something called secondary collision. When you're thrown clear of the vehicle, you'll usually be thrown in the direction of the roll or the direction the vehicle is traveling. Now, this could mean the car rolls over you and crushes you, but by far the most common issue is secondary collision. Now, as you are thrown clear, you're traveling at the same speed as the car. So if the vehicle is moving forward at 50 miles per hour when the crash occurs and you're not belted, you will continue moving forward at 50 miles per hour until you hit something that stops your motion. It's that rapid stop or secondary collision that hurts you. A secondary collision could be with part of the car, or if you're ejected, something outside the car, like a tree or the ground or any of countless other deadly obstacles. When you're belted into the car, you slow at the same rate as the car rather than keep moving at high speed until you hit something to stop your movement. When buckled in, your body will slow at the same rate as the car, helping you avoid a secondary impact and the injuries associated with a secondary impact. It's the secondary collision that most often kills you. Finally, there's the issue of your airbags. which rely on you being in the proper position to provide protection. Now that means your seat belt must be buckled so you're held in that proper position during an accident. No seat belt could mean a wrong position, and a wrong position could mean you're seriously injured or dead. Please buckle up to stay alive. All right, so much for the gruesome stuff. Now let's welcome Mr. John Davis from Motor Week. John, good morning.
I'm not sure you're finished with the gruesome stuff, Pat. Good morning.
How you doing?
It is a beautiful day outside, in case people haven't stuck their nose out yet.
Yes.
At least it is here.
So, hey, I understand you've got something for us about the Frankfurt Auto Show.
Yeah, I just got back. The Frankfurt Motor Show, for those that aren't aware, is this year's biggest auto show in Europe, and it happens every 2 years. And it's kind of a must-stop if you're in the business of looking at trends and what's coming. And I have to tell you, it's interesting that it hasn't gotten very much publicity here this year, which is atypical. But I think that's because there was very little there that will be of much interest to most Americans. The two trends that were absolutely overwhelming, and I mean they just were everywhere, is autonomous driving, which you could have guessed at, but also intense electrification. This is being pushed along by countries like France and supposedly the United Kingdom, and saying that they're going to ban internal combustion engine, gas and diesel, new cars by 2030 or 2040, and I'll get back to that in a minute. And then California is piling on, saying they're looking at the same thing. So everywhere you looked, almost all the new concepts were, EVs, or the dirty little secret is a lot of them were hybrids, but they are now considering those EVs. And that's where this whole thing about banning internal combustion engine cars starts to get a little murky. Most of the people that want to get them off the roads, or what they're really talking about, is making sure that everything that still has an internal combustion engine is some kind of a hybrid. At least that's what's probably going to happen in the UK. It may happen in California, and I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't happen to France by the time they get around to it. So it's not quite the extinction of gas and diesel as we know it yet, although I think it's pretty clear down the road, maybe in 50 to 75 years, that every car will be basically powered by some form of electrification.
Yeah, and well, I guess that gives us some time to get the infrastructure and the support people and everything in line for it.
Well, I hope so, because right now, I mean, we spent a lot of time driving around, and, you go through these small towns, and they have cars parked up on the sidewalks. There's no place to park the cars. Most people don't have garages because the towns are very concentrated. How in the world are you going to charge them up? I'll tell you a funny story. I was out in the middle of nowhere in Germany and stopped at a gas station. And as we were leaving, I noticed there were 5 Tesla charging stations sitting there at this gas station, and guys sitting in their Model S's, obviously bored to tears while they're waiting for that hour or so to charge up. That it's going to have to get where charging is just as convenient as putting fuel in a car for this to really be more than a politician's dream, I think.
Yeah, and when you think about a country as big as the U.S., that is a huge problem.
Yeah, I just don't think I think it's less likely to happen here for the simple reason that we are so big. Now, do I think that everything's going to have a hybrid of some type, some electrification? Yeah, I do, and that was also on display there, and this will affect you a lot, as we have now 3, 4, 5 new models that have adopted the new 48-volt electrical systems. and there's a projection that by 2025, probably 25 to 30% of the cars here and everywhere will have them. And that essentially, besides it giving the car more power to run autonomous driving features and all that stuff and electric turbochargers, it actually takes the vehicle and turns it into a mild hybrid if the manufacturer wants to, and they do. And that right there improves fuel economy by anywhere from 8 to 20%, depending on who you believe. And we've seen the Audi A8 that was shown at Frankfurt, the new Mercedes S-Class. There's even already a couple of Audis out there, one a diesel using an electric turbocharger that's gone to this. But before everybody panics, right now they're talking about your car will actually have a dual electrical system. It will continue to have a 12-volt system with a 12-volt battery for accessories like the radio and so forth, but all of this advanced stuff will be run off a 48-volt with a small lithium-ion battery at the moment tacked somewhere. So that's going to become very common, I think, pretty quick, especially high-end cars.
All right. John, we need to take a break. When we come back, we will talk more with John Davis from Motor Week, and we're going to talk to Brian from Idaho, 69 Ford Fairlane, coming up right here on Goss's Garage.
Stay tuned. Pat will take your calls next at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Never drive with a bad attitude. I know that's hard with so many stupid, distracted, aggressive, and just plain rude drivers on the road, but it really is the safe thing to do. I drive a lot, and I used to see reckless, rude, or aggressive drivers maybe once a month. But today, it seems like every other driver is doing something stupid. When it was sporadic, it wasn't so hard to deal with, but now it seems like there's always an idiot 3 feet from my rear bumper or weaving into my lane or cutting me off. Distracted? Probably. Dangerous? Absolutely. But there's nothing to do except drive defensively and not aggravate other drivers. Much as I'd like to, I don't middle finger the offending driver, and definitely don't hit my brakes to scare a tailgater. Initially, these situations may be simple mistakes, but an aggressive response to a mistake can escalate it into a personal confrontation, which can easily turn into road rage. Unfortunately, you have no idea which one of these idiots will try to hurt you with their car, a weapon, or their fists. Also, never make direct eye contact with the offending driver. If you're the offender, be courteous and get out of the way. Whether it's a mistake or intentional aggression, remember, back down, yield, let it go. It takes brains to overcome anger. Use your brain. Be smart. Life changes at a ferocious pace these days, especially when it comes to maintaining our cars. For example, automatic transmissions now need regular fluid flushes. Transmission fluid breaks down with use, and although it may look fine, its additives wear out and it can no longer properly protect bands, clutches, seals, and other hugely expensive parts inside your transmission. Bottom line, more wear and a shorter transmission life. Now you can significantly extend transmission life with a BG transmission flush every 24 to 30,000 miles or 2 years. BG makes the best transmission flush machine I've ever tested. It renews all of the fluid in your transmission, not just a small part of it. The BG transmission flush machine is safe too, because it uses the natural circulation of the transmission. Your transmission will work better and last longer. As with everything BG offers, this is a superior service. For more information, go to bgprod.com or bgfindashop.com.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677.
This portion of Goss's Garage is brought to you by BG Products. And yes, I do use them in my cars. Yes, I do sell them in both shops. So no funny stuff going on there. Love the products. And we have on the line with us Mr. John Davis, the host of Motor Week. John,
Hey, Pat.
let's go to North Idaho and talk to Brian.
That's a
Brian
long
has
way.
a 69 Ford Fairlane. Brian, welcome to Goss's Garage.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, Pat. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay. Now, first, I don't want you to get angry with me because I've seen some of your past shows and I've sensed a little frustration on these questions from you. So, I'm
All right, we're buckled up, ready to go.
All right. I made the mistake of going online and doing my own research, and that was a big mistake because there's just too many people with too many opinions on this.
Oh, yeah.
And it has to do with oil. And just, if you could give me a simple yes or no answer to this, if it's possible, do I need to run special oil in that old 69 flat tappet hydraulic camshaft engine?
Well,
Or are new oils just fine, synthetic or otherwise?
well, new oils may not be just fine. And
Okay.
there's no way of knowing on an individual vehicle whether or not you need the zinc. So if you're going to use a new oil, I would use one of the additives that replaces the zinc that was in the older oils, or I would use one of the oils designed specifically for a flat tappet engine, just to be on the safe side. Probably would never have any issue unless you run the car hard or something like that, but you know, you're going to be hating life if you do have an issue.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of the consensus I got, but as you know, their opinions are like you know what out there, and even people that you would tend to trust, like I belong to the Fairlane Club, and there's a lot of technical advisors in there from that used to work for Ford, and even among those experts, there's differing opinions on that. So
Yeah,
that's kind of the consensus I came to. Now, does that go for the synthetic oils as well? I would still need an additive in that, or does that depend on the synthetic oil?
Right. It you know, with a synthetic, of course, you're gaining shear strength and a whole reduced friction and stuff like that. And in most cases, we have not seen a problem in a flat tappet engine. But that doesn't mean that there isn't some cars out there that do have a problem with it. And I think to some extent, what ultimately winds up being a problem is people who haven't taken really good care of the car in the past, and maybe there's already a little bit of damage there, and they decide,
Right.
well, I'm just going to go with synthetic oil and that's going to be it. And then the initial problem, this teeny little pockmark that you probably couldn't see that's already in one of the lifters, you know, that grows, and then you have an issue with cam and lifters.
Yeah, and that's kind of what brought up this subject for me, because I actually have two of these Fairlanes. One I'm going to just put back on the road as a daily driver, the other I'm restoring. The one I'm going to restore has tons of valve train noise, and I can't find the problem. I don't know what's causing the noise. I assumed it's probably a scrubbed cam, because you know, I pulled the valve covers and checked the valve lash, you know, made sure that nothing was loose up there. Everything seemed fine on a cursory, so that's kind of what brought the subject up for me.
All right.
So,
well, one of the things to do, I don't know if you've already done it or not, with the engine idling, take a hammer, hold the head of the hammer in your hand, and on the push rod end of the rocker arms, one at a time,
right.
just let it sit there and idle and push as hard as you can on the push rod end of the rocker arm with the handle of the hammer and see what happens. If you're able to collapse the lifter.
Okay, gotcha, yeah.
And
Trying to make it leak down, yeah.
yeah, and lots of times you'll find you just put the least little bit of pressure on them and bang, they collapse and start clacking like crazy, and then you know that you've just got weak lifters.
Okay. All right, I'll give that a try, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, take care. All right. John, you had Mustang, not Fairlane or anything like that, right?
Yeah, I had a Mustang.
And a Corvette. And
Mustang, a Corvette, and had a Pantera. That was the only really exotic thing that I ever owned, and the only reason I bought that was it had a Ford engine. It had a Mustang engine in it, so I knew I could keep that running. It was everything else that gave me the problems.
Yeah, a lot of them had a problem with the body melting.
Yeah, mine wasn't the body melting; it was the frame melting. They never engineered drain holes into the frame, even when they continued making the car well into, I guess, the 90s. And I was, of course, a member of one of the Pantera clubs, and one day I read about, this problem of water building up in the frame, and because the frame had open inspection areas at the top, so I crawled into the engine bay and took a light. And sure enough, here's the frame about half filled with muddy, rusty water. And I freaked out. But, in those days when the manufacturer found a problem, they kind of did quiet recalls, and they didn't put out a big public notice. Well, apparently Ford was, if you complained to Ford, they were fixing them. And if you didn't get it fixed. And I didn't know about that at the time. But it was, I still miss the car. I miss it every day, except I don't miss lying under it every weekend fixing it.
It's interesting, these warranties and recalls and things like that. Steve, Steve here in the studio.
Right.
He took his Jeep in to Chrysler dealer because the horn was going nuts and the wipers were getting all goofy and crazy things like that. And they told him that it needed a new clock spring, and I guess it was like $750 or some such thing. And he called me and wanted me to verify the price. And I told him, I said, Steve, I think you need to run the VIN number on it, but I think you're going to find that Jeep is under a Chrysler lifetime recall on the clock spring. And sure enough, he called them, and then they did this thing where, oh, well, gee, we talked to the owner, we talked to Chrysler, we talked to all these people, we managed to get it covered for you, like they were doing him a big favor.
Yeah.
So we see some of that.
I had a kind of an opposite situation. Is I had suggested to a friend some years ago about buying a Kia, and they bought it, and they've been very, very happy. But it had, this, or it was a Hyundai, I guess. It had this long 100,000-mile warranty, and it had all sorts of extra protection and blah, 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 blah. And it says everything is covered. Well, of course it isn't. And they took it in with a fault in the navigation system. And it was the only year that the navigation system wasn't covered under the quote-unquote whole vehicle warranty, which means the manufacturer wasn't confident enough of the system to give it the warranty it gives every other part in the car. And fortunately, it turned out to be not a major issue, but even if you read the warranty book, you still may be in for a surprise.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of these warranties, really what they're covering is the driveline.
Exactly.
Lubricated parts.
That was the first rule of thumb that you ever taught our viewers, that the powertrain warranties cover lubricated parts. If it's an alternator, that's not covered, something like that, or an air conditioner compressor. It's whatever is lubricated.
Yeah. So you got to, one of the best things I've found to, if you can get a hold of it, is the exclusion list on these warranties. Be concerned with what they don't cover instead of what they do cover.
That's right. just same with homeowner warranties.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, we need to take another break. We'll be right back. More with John Davis from Motor Week coming up on Goss's Garage.
Operators are standing by to take your call for Pat at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
I get lots of air filter questions, and one of the most common deals with why air filters need to be replaced so often. Well, actually, they usually don't, yet many drivers wind up buying a new air filter at every oil change, which is utterly ridiculous. Drivers say techs tell them if they don't buy a new air filter, they'll waste a lot of gas. Maybe that statement comes from ignorance or maybe dishonesty, but either way, you lose. Decades ago, dirty air filters did waste gas, but today, not so much. Cars now use a sensor to measure the air coming through the air filter, and computers to mix exactly the right amount of gas to match that air. So even though a dirty air filter reduces airflow into the engine, it doesn't affect gas mileage because the computer is always precisely matching fuel to the incoming air. In other words, a dirty filter means less air, and less air means less gas, so there's never an imbalance between air and fuel. Certainly when a filter gets really, really dirty, it can cause performance problems, but even then it may not affect gas mileage. So how long do air filters last? Unless you drive in really dusty conditions, air filters usually last 30 to 60,000 miles. Overselling of air filters is an enormous problem, and the best way not to be taken is to learn how to check your own air filter and check it twice a year. I get lots of questions about BG products, many about specific products or services like, is BG44K really that good, or are BG transmission, cooling system, and power steering flushes actually necessary? But most popular of all, do I use BG products in my cars? Well, the answer to all of those questions is yes. A regular schedule of BG flushes and chemicals will deliver the longest possible life from all the lubricated and fuel delivery parts on your vehicles. And do I use BG products? You bet I do. I drive nice cars, and I drive a lot. Plus, my live radio and TV shows mean that my cars have to be absolutely reliable. A no start from dirty fuel injectors or a failed transmission just isn't acceptable in my life. Remember, deposits and dirty fluids ruin expensive parts. For reliability like I demand, visit one of the quality shops that sell BG products and perform BG services. To find a BG professional near you, bgfindashop.com.
Now, back to Goss's Garage with your host, Pat Goss.
All right, folks, 844-885-4677. If you'd like to talk to me, I'm Pat Goss, or John Davis from Motor Week. John, what other interesting things do you have for us today?
Well, I want to go back to one of the messages you gave in your break, and I know this is going to completely fall on deaf ears, but during this trip to Germany, I actually drove a lot, more than I've ever driven there before, and I drove about 1,700 miles over about 10 days. And the thing, of course, that I knew from experience but was really driven home was the civility of driving in Germany. The fact that you drive very fast. I mean, in most cases, even though I was in a little 1-liter Ford C-Max, we were doing 90 and 100. But that's only because everybody in the left lane was doing 120 to 150. So you knew to stay over to the right. It's actually illegal if you don't. You never pass on the right. You always use your turn signals, and you always look in your or have eyes on the rearview mirrors to see who's coming up from behind you. I felt safer at 100 miles an hour in fairly heavy traffic in Germany because of the quality of the driving that I was seeing around me than I do at 60 miles an hour on I-95. Matter of fact, when we got off the plane, we came back from Philadelphia. You know, that 100 miles from Philly to Baltimore is like being on a billiard table with cars.
Yeah.
And just as you were mentioning in your spot, everybody's just switching lanes and tailgating and doing all sorts of stuff. The Germans don't tailgate. They leave a reasonable amount of distance. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but boy, have we gone from bad to horrible as far as our driving habits here.
Yeah, it seems to get worse every day.
It really does. The other thing that struck me at the Frankfurt Motor Show was how vehicles seem to be, well, the Europeans have caught the SUV disease or trend that we have. Almost everything that was new of any that's going to sell in volume was some form of an SUV or a square hatchback that had the flavor of an SUV. So just like American music and television shows seem to basically have worldwide appeal, it looks like what's going on here with SUVs is taking over there as well. You know, I'm not so sure that in another 5 or 6 years there's going to be any mid-size, sedans, four-door sedans with a trunk for sale here. Maybe there'll be one or two like the Honda Accord and Camry, but I mean, just about everybody else is either going to do away with them or add a hatchback or something. So the family sedan is definitely in danger.
Well, you know, for years I've typically had at least 2, possibly 3 cars, and usually if I had 2 cars, one would be a regular sedan, and then
Right.
I'd have some old SUV that I'd use as a beater. Well, now what I did is I got rid of my sedan, and I have a Jeep, a Grand
Right.
Cherokee, and that replaces the 2 cars.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, they're so versatile, and frankly, around here because people drive so badly, when weather gets bad, the all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive system takes on a safety aspect above and beyond just being able to get around in snow. I've got, my lot has basically got a four-wheel drive pickup truck and a Subaru all-wheel drive station wagon, and the only utility vehicle I've got is a little Mini Cooper. So I understand, and even that's a hatchback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've just found that over time that I always was using the SUV because it seems like I'm always hauling some crap around or doing
Right.
something
Right.
with it, and it just seemed to make sense because I was limited as to what I could do with a sedan. And finally I said, why am I paying insurance on all of these different vehicles and so on, and when I really typically only use one?
Yeah, it does make you stop and think. It's like, do I really need 3 cars?
Right.
The only reason, I mean, we hold on to the pickup truck because it's old and it's great for doing what I did early this morning, which is running to the dump. So,
Running to the dump, okay.
first thing Saturday morning.
Oh, all right. Well, I have a landfill about, 3-4 miles from the house if I elect to do that. So it's a
that's what we
recycling
do.
center and landfill and so on.
Oh, you're just using the proper term. You're so politically correct. I mean, my goodness. It's
Yeah.
a dump.
Okay, it's a dump.
The recycling center.
Yes, the recycling. Well, actually, it is divided. There are 2 gates, and you go in. One is for waste, and the other is recycling. So,
Ours is all together, but you have to. If you're recycling, you don't have to go over the scales. That's basically the big difference.
Gotcha. All right. What else is going on at Motor Week?
Well, we're well into season 37, and the recent hurricanes have brought back. We spend a lot of time talking about alternative fuels, not necessarily electricity, but compressed natural gas and propane and biodiesel. And the hurricanes that we've all been seen in the news recently, and fortunately haven't experienced too much around here, they've really brought into focus how so many municipalities around the country have been able to get back up and running fairly quickly because they were using things like natural gas to power emergency vehicles rather than gasoline that has to be brought in by a truck, because the natural gas obviously is brought in mostly by pipeline. So we've gotten some extra interest about that. On the flip side of that, I think what's happened in Puerto Rico, when you look at huge sections of the country, in this case the whole island, but suppose that was a state, or suppose that was anywhere. I guess you could also say this applies to Texas, where they lost electrical power for days and days and days. Just think if we were all driving around in electric cars, what would be our mobility? We'd be basically out of whack until they got the grid back up. So I've been looking at what all these terrible natural disasters and thinking this is the best possible reason that all types of fuels should remain relevant, because while some have some advantages, in other situations, those advantages may go away. So I'm not one of these people that thinks everything ought to go wholesale one way or another as far as fuel.
Well, I understand one of the major manufacturers of electric cars is going to give you a car and a donkey, so that in natural disasters you've got a way around.
I wonder if you get a Don Quixote hat with it.
You never know. Could be.
The other thing we noticed is that in Europe, which if you've ever been there, you know most people drive small cars. Well, guess what? They're getting bigger. They're catching our disease too. Where it used to be everything you saw running around was a compact or subcompact, now it's more like mid-size and larger. So I guess they're getting more prosperous, I guess.
Well, I think one of the things that may have an impact on that, don't they pay a tax on the size of the engine?
Yes,
and
they're now gotten
these new smaller engines like Mercedes with the 2-liter diesel that they're using in the E-Class, and I think they've got it in the GLE and things like that. So they got this little teeny engine that produces a lot of power and really works well.
Oh yeah, you're seeing upwards of 300 horsepower out of 2-liter turbos.
Right.
And yes, they do. Anything above 2 liters usually is taxed very highly. The vehicle, a little car I rented, perfect indication, small 4-cylinder turbo C-Max, and it was huge on the inside. It was not real long, but it was quite tall, and very able to keep up with most of the traffic, so why not?
Yeah. It's really interesting, this resurgence of turbo engines. Back in the, back in the 80s, when Chrysler, and there were several turbo engines out, and you couldn't keep a turbo alive for much over 40,000 miles. And
I remember it well.
Oh, God, what a nightmare it was. But these new ones, we don't seem to see any problems like that.
Well, as you have explained to our audience on Motor Week, it all comes down to the better way of lubrication.
Right. There are also a lot of these turbos today are liquid cooled. They're running coolant from the cooling system through them and different things like that to control the heat, and better bearings, and using better oils and all kinds of things, and they really seem to have a handle on it.
I remember when we went on the air, and I guess Subaru had some turbos out there, and you had to let them spin down for a minute when you came to a stop before you turned it off to not risk damage.
Yeah.
Can you imagine doing that now?
No. I couldn't imagine doing it then, much less now.
Yeah.
But, you know, we did a show back in those days. We did a show with a company out of New Jersey, I think it was, that built these relays that kept the coolant or something, kept the engine running at idle.
Right.
And it would idle for 2 minutes or something like that, and then it would shut the engine off so that you couldn't just shut the engine down when the turbo was blazing hot.
Mm-hmm.
But
now, almost nothing we test, especially from a European manufacturer and increasingly from Asian and domestic, doesn't have a turbo on it. So the engines, you know, and I've gotten pushback from especially a lot of people that own expensive cars like Mercedes and BMWs. They really want that V6 because that's what they've always had, or a V8. And I say, you know what? You better get used to it because small turbo engines are here to stay, and I don't care who's in the White House. It's the global trend. You know, small engines mean less fuel is used.
yeah, exactly.
And less smog, I should say.
Yeah, and you look at what's happened, like with Ford, with their trucks. I mean, goodness gracious, who'd have thought?
Yeah. Who would have thought that 2/3 of the F-150 trucks sold would be six-cylinder engines, and of that, half of all their trucks have six-cylinder turbos.
Yeah, yeah.
Never would have dreamed it.
No. All right, we need to take another break. We'll be right back with John Davis from Motor Week coming up here on Goss's Garage.
Stay tuned. Pat will take your calls next at 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-GOSS. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Space Saver spare tires sure do look silly, but if you use them properly, they will get you home safely. Now, a common problem with them is low air pressure. Spares are buried in the trunk and no one ever seems to check their pressure. Plus, they typically require much higher pressure than your regular tires. Also, Space Saver spares have limits on how far and how fast you can drive on them. Bottom line, always read and follow the caution warnings on their labels and sidewalls. Oh yeah, don't be one of those poor schmucks with a flat tire and a flat spare. Check your spare once a month. While checking the spare, look at the jack handle, and the lug wrench to be sure everything is there and in working order. The best spare tire in the world is useless without the tools to put it on the car. Some cars may even require special lug nuts to mount the spare. If those special lug nuts are missing, you will have no safe way to use your spare. Life changes at a ferocious pace these days, especially when it comes to maintaining our cars. For example, automatic transmissions now need regular fluid flushes. Transmission fluid breaks down with use, and although it may look fine, its additives wear out and it can no longer properly protect bands, clutches, seals, and other hugely expensive parts inside your transmission. Bottom line, more wear and a shorter transmission life. Now you can significantly extend transmission life with a BG transmission flush every 24 to 30,000 miles or 2 years. BG makes the best transmission flush machine I've ever tested. It renews all of the fluid in your transmission, not just a small part of it. The BG transmission flush machine is safe too because it uses the natural circulation of the transmission. Your transmission will work better and last longer. As with everything BG offers, this is a superior service. For more information, go to bgprod.com or bgfindashop.com.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-GOSS. And now, Pat Goss.
Hey, for those of you enjoying Goss's Garage on TuneIn.com, please note our new show time every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, and we do repeat at 1 o'clock. Of course, at 1 o'clock, the old time slot, you can't call in. We're joined this morning by John Davis, the host of Motor Week. John, I understand up the road, a short distance from you, you have a car show in Gamber today.
Oh, this morning?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just down the road from me. And we actually have a number of shows around here during the fall, and they're all, just like the Gamber one, they're all related to our volunteer fire departments. I live in a county, Carroll County, Maryland, where all of the fire departments are volunteer, and that's the Gamber Fire Department. And then a couple weeks ago, they had one on the other side of me at Reese. But the great thing about it is that for all of these people that keep claiming that cars are becoming ubiquitous and nobody cares what they drive anymore, it's just an appliance, all you have to do is go out and look at that, those shows, and see how stupid that is. And I'm sure it's the same down your way, but the Saturday morning Cars and Coffee lineup around this area is just gigantic, where people come out, before 10 a.m. and show their cars. So the car culture is still alive, and I think even with electrification, it will stay that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. Hey, John, we have a recorded question from Chris in Pennsylvania. Let's see what he has to say.
Hey, Pat, just found out you were back on the radio. Good to hear. Anyway, it's Chris Freeman calling from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. I recently got a 2005 Ford Escape. Excellent deal. Has a slight miss. Replaced the coil units, all the plugs, PCV valve. I did the dollar bill test on the tailpipe. It's sucking air back in the tailpipe, so I'm thinking burned valve. But I'm wondering if there's anything else other than a burned valve that could cause it. I put some top cylinder lubricant and stuff like that in it, some fuel system cleaner. I'm going to try and get a can of BG44K and put that in there if I can find a place. I did find a place up here that carries it, and I got one of your old coupons, and he's going to see if I can still get a can. But anyway, so is there anything else other than burned valve? I suppose there could be carbon in the valve seats, just a poorly made valve. According to paperwork that was in the car, this problem started in 2015 down in Texas. So, okay, here's my phone number.
All right. Chris, the thing here is there a check engine light? If there's no check engine light, then there really isn't a misfire, at least not one that counts. It doesn't mean that you might not have a rough idle or something like that, but there are a lot of other reasons that you could have a rough idle. The business with the tailpipe, using a dollar bill on the tailpipe doesn't really cut it anymore, because virtually all of these engines have variable valve timing, and in many cases they have so much valve overlap that you actually get something on that order at the tailpipe. So I would discount that test 100%. Other things that it could be carbon buildup on the valve stem or the valve seat or the valve face. It could also be a weak or broken valve spring. There are lots and lots of things that it could be. So what we normally would do is look at the data stream from the computer or from the sensors leading into the computer and the commands coming out of the computer to see if everything is within specs.
and of course do a proper compression test and so on, which would tell you if there is leakage past the valve. The BG44K I think is a great idea because lots of times if it is carbon buildup, that'll take care of it. John, you have anything to add to that?
I just want to ask you, is there any possibility it could be a small leak in the exhaust manifold or in the exhaust system?
That wouldn't cause a rough idle, but
That would cause a tick.
yeah, definitely. We see a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of these new manifolds and so on, they're lightweight. Many of them are no longer cast iron. They're stamped steel. They're more like an old-fashioned tube header, and they'll get a teeny little opening in the gasket between the manifold and the head, and especially when you first start them, it'll sound just like you got a bad lifter.
Yeah. The thing we notice with so much of even the brand new things that we get is that rough idle is not uncommon, depending on the situation and and the weather conditions and so forth and so on. I think it's less common than say a few years ago, but he's talking about a vehicle that's 6 years old. So
yeah, and the thing of it is, these days, unless it meets the criteria that are programmed into the computer, if there's no check engine light and no codes, then that's a normal idle.
That's kind of what I was also getting at. I mean, it may just be that's never been a particularly smooth running engine in the first place.
Right. Yeah, they do tend to be a little coarse and rough and so on. And like a lot of them, what we find, we have people that chase a rough idle, come to find out, and we see this on Hondas all the time. Been here, been there, been someplace else, and all kinds of new parts. And what we ultimately find is that the engine doesn't have a rough idle, has a bad engine mount.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Forgot about that.
Yeah.
Hey, do we have a couple minutes left? I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Here we are headed into the winter months again, and every year I have rodents that get into one or more of my vehicles and eat through tubing or wires and cause engine lights and maybe just build nests. If you and you live out in a little bit of a rural area, as I recall,
right.
What do you suggest to people that have vehicles that sit outside, not without being used, but say they don't get used for a week at a time? What do you do, or what do you suggest to your customers to cut down on the rodent situation over the winter? Because nowadays, the wiring insulation is like food for these things.
Yeah, well, of course, there's nothing you can, well, there is something you can do about that, too. The first thing, of course, is to make sure there's no food source that's even close to where the vehicles are parked. A lot of people will have things like grass seed in their garage and things like that, and they wonder why the rodents eat their wiring. Well, there's a food source there, and there's a warm place to nest. So you've got to get rid of the food source. You keep the bags of dog food and all these other things around, get rid of that. But one of the biggest things is this new insulation on wiring. It's been around for several years now, and it's a soy-based product, which it's like soy candy, I guess, for...
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, and they just love this stuff, and they eat the bejeebers out of it. Honda, you can go to Honda. Honda has a tape that you can wrap around the wire harness, and it is laced with capsaicin.
I don't even know what that is.
Capsaicin,
essentially the same thing that they use in pepper spray and things like that.
Okay.
Really, really
Yeah.
bitey chemical. And so it's, they don't like it. That much I can tell you. They don't like it a little bit. And that would be a good thing to do, be a good Saturday afternoon project, is to take a couple rolls of this and, you know, start wrapping wire harnesses with it.
Well, that's a good suggestion. I may try that on my pickup truck, because I have every year they eat through something, and I get, you know, check engine light or something, and, you know, a couple $100 later, I bring it back, and 6 months later they've done it again.
Well, at least, and as I understand this problem that you've been having is an ongoing problem lately, you haven't said anything about him eating a tire.
No, they haven't eaten any tires, but they've eaten. They keep eating through the low-hanging fruit, the tubes and all that go to the fuel tank or to the vapor canister or a wire. And of course, initially you'll get a light like for the gas cap, and then it becomes a check engine light, and it's like then it's you know, another trip to the shop.
Yeah, I think this this rodent deterrent tape is probably the most effective thing I've seen. You know, people talk about using steel wool. Well, number one, I wouldn't use steel wool around anything on a car because it rusts and makes a general mess of things after a couple of months.
Certainly does.
If you're going to do,
I know that from experience.
Yeah, if you're going to do something like that, go to a marine store and buy bronze wool, which doesn't rust or anything. It'll stay indefinitely. But mothballs and all these other things, none of them really seem to work.
Mm-mm.
So
I wonder if you got a really potent pepper spray, if that would actually, if you could spray it around the engine compartment, it might help or not.
I'm sure it probably would, especially if you could get it so that they have to walk through it or something and it burns their feet, then, you know, that would probably work. The only trouble is that getting it to hold up for any period of time.
Yeah, of course.
But, hey, John, we have finished today's show. I want to thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure,
Always
as always.
Pleasure. Always fun, Pat. Thanks very much, and have a great week.
Okay, take care. We'll talk to you soon. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks to John Davis from Motor Week for joining us today. And, of course, thanks to Steve McMillan and George Stockton for producing today's show. For everyone here at Goss's Garage, I'm Pat Goss. Until next time, hey, everybody, please, please drive gently and buckle up. See ya.